Alright, so today I'm going to be sharing with you the 3 most dislikable traits and behaviors that I consistently see people making. But before we get into that, just who am I and why should you listen to me? So my name's Tom, and just in a couple of short years, I've gone from someone who was unable to hold a conversation to save my life, from experiencing extreme social anxiety, just debilitating fear. And if we're being candid and honest with each other, my best friends were probably my parents, to being a much more socially outgoing and confident person, to being able to do scary things like talking to a camera. I don't have a million friends, but I have a good sized circle of quality friends that I know I can count on. And that's all we want at the end of the day. I'm also in the very fortunate position of being able to teach those same lessons to others. I'm actively helping other people make that transformation. So if that's something you're interested in, you can go down into the link in my description and join my Discord server. I should also probably mention that I work in sales. It is literally my job to be social, to approach strangers and build quick relations with them. Just through doing that, I've probably met around 1,000 people this year. So I think all of that has made me quite socially attuned, quite conscious of what makes someone likable and dislikable. And to be honest, I can very easily spot when others are making these mistakes. And I think the worst part is when they themselves aren't even aware of it. Like, they can be thinking they're making perfectly good conversation. In some instances, I've even seen people who think they're being charming, but it's actually having the opposite effects. Is driving people away. So I want you to listen very closely, because I can guarantee you're making at least one of these mistakes. And if you're not aware of it, then you are permanently limiting your ability to not just make friends, but make money, find a relationship partner, and just live a happy and fulfilling life in general. And I'm going to be sharing the absolute worst, most destructive mistake that I see people making towards the end of the video, so make sure you stick around for that. So this first mistake is very common amongst my demographic, so young men in their late teens or early 20s. So this was a couple of days ago. I walk into my local gym at a slightly different time than I'd usually go, but I'm not really expecting much to be different. I'm still expecting it to be busy, full of people talking, and just a general level of noise. But to my surprise, it is completely silent. So I'm gazing around the room and I'm like, what's going on? And it's full of guys my age, all with the same expression on their face. You know, the expression that guys make when they're trying to look tough, but really it's not them. You can see through it. And I don't know what it is, whether all these guys have been watching too much Tate. They've been listening to advice that says you need to be red pill and alpha and stoic at all times. You need to hold masculine frame. But in that moment, I was trying my absolute hardest to hold in a laugh. Because when all these guys have the same idea, you just end up with a room full of people who they literally look like they're holding in a shit. That's the expression they have on their face. And it's just silent. They're all afraid to talk to each other because they're at risk of compromising their masculine frame. And I want to say to each and every one of these guys, stop taking yourself so seriously. So you know when you're walking down the street and you see those guys, mean looking expression on their face. They just look angry. And as you're walking past him, you're kind of thinking, damn, I better not bump into that guy. The thing is with most of these guys is they're some of the most self-conscious people in the world. They care so very deeply about what you think of them. And in fact, their worst fear is you rejecting them. This is actually very common amongst guys, and it's a little bit sad. It sounds cliche, but they're afraid to be themselves, to show the world who they are. So they put on this mask as this extra layer of protection, this tough guy mask. And that's their way of saying, if I look angry all the time, to the point where I'm putting people off, they don't want to mess with me, that's my way of rejecting them before they can reject me. But there's a couple of problems with this. The first one is that wearing this mask all the time becomes absolutely exhausting. It's impossible for you to play a character forever. And the second is that any friendships, any connections that you make, because they're based on this lie, because you're not being true to yourself, they're only ever going to be superficial at best. You can very easily find yourself surrounded by fake friends who you can't really trust, who don't like the real you. And as someone who's had experience with that can be even more lonely and socially isolating than having no friends. This may well sound like an oversimplification, but just be you. Smile when you're happy. Laugh like you don't care who hears you. And have a fucking sense of humor. Stop taking yourself so seriously. So I hope you're paying close attention because this second one is very hateable. If you make this mistake, you will permanently limit your ability to make good quality friends. So listen up. So again, this is a couple of weeks ago. I'm out with a friend and a couple of his friends. These guys are more like acquaintances to me. And we're all out getting drinks and having a social time. And suddenly out of the blue, this guy appears who I haven't seen in about 4 years. And he's someone that I have a lot of time for. Like, I do really rate this kid. So we invite him over to the table and naturally he starts telling us a few stories about what he's been getting up to, how he's been spending his time at university. And he launches into this particular story that I found quite entertaining. It was this absolute nightmare of a group project where right before they submitted the work, his entire team just fell out and refused to work with each other. And I like where this story is going. Like, I want to hear how this drama unfolds. But as soon as he starts explaining, this other guy at the table just butts his fat head in and interjects to say, oh yeah, we played your uni at rugby. This guy just out of nowhere hijacks the convo just as it was getting good and starts making about him and his rugby team. So at this point, I start observing the reactions of people around the table. So this guy's mates, they don't care. They're clearly unbothered. But then I'm looking back at the guy who was originally telling the story and he looks very uncomfortable. He's trying to make out that he wasn't really bothered by that, but I can tell he was just by his body language. He's gone on quiet and like he kind of looks like he doesn't want to be there. And to be honest, I was bothered as well. Like, I wanted to hear how that story played out. So I tried to get him to keep on telling it to me one-on-one, but it's just not the same. He's lost all of his enthusiasm for telling the story and he just looks deflated. So guys, the ability to listen, and I mean really listen, is such a rare and undervalued skill in today's world. And then vice versa, instead of listening, just waiting for your turn to speak, interjecting for the sake of your own ego is one of the most annoying things to witness. And whether it's intentional or not, if you signal to someone enough times that they're not important enough to be heard, that is how they build up this silent resentment. They end up silently hating your guts. And it can be very difficult to come back from that. And if this was coming from my boss and I couldn't do anything about it, then that would be pretty shit. But this is a social setting. I don't have to be there if I don't want to. So I will willingly choose to not spend any more time with you if you do this. So if you want to stop making this mistake, then you must learn to cultivate a sense of presence in your conversations. And presence is something which is practiced by some of the most beloved, charismatic individuals on the planet. All of the great communicators know how important it is. So if that's something you want to learn more about, then I made an amazing video on how to do just that. I'd highly recommend you go and check it out. Okay, so I'm about to tell you the worst, most dislikable behavior of them all. And I'm also going to explain how this ruined one of my closest friendships. So I'm in high school one day. I think I'm on like a free period. I'm just getting on with some work in the library. And I'm sitting next to one of my closest friends. And out of nowhere, he confesses something to me. He says, Tom, it feels like you're one of the only friends I have left. And he wants to know if I think there's any reason for that, any reason why people are now choosing to spend less time with him. And that kind of caught me off guard because firstly, I could tell it was bothering him, but it was also the fact that I've never seen him be this introspective. And I think I could tell even then that maybe that was part of the reason why. So he tells me I can be honest with him, and I agree to do so only out of a place of love because I do genuinely care about this guy. But at the same time, the things I'm about to tell him have really been getting on my nerves and I feel like have been damaging our friendship. So I confessed to him that I don't think you're a very self-aware person. So just to give you a bit of context, I do think of this guy as a good person. He's got a good heart and he probably is one of my most loyal friends. But at the same time, he has a few behaviors which I would consider very socially alienating to other people. So just a couple of examples. We could be walking into a social setting or like a party or a room full of people, and he'd just have this absolute scowl on his face, just be looking mean, like kind of like what I was talking about before. But then when no one would come up to him or want to initiate a conversation, he'd act all confused, like he'd be annoyed at them. He'd say, oh, these guys are all idiots anyway. Or we'd be in the club together and he'd be making statements like, you know, I could get any girl I wanted in here, I just choose not to, or they're all ugly bitches anyway. When literally 2 minutes ago, I'd seen him try it on with a girl and it didn't go that way. All right, so my camera died, but the point I'm trying to make with this is I didn't want to get too hung up on any of those behaviors because those were all actually quite correctable. He could change those with a little bit of effort on his part without much difficulty. But the thing that was 10 times more frustrating for me was this guy's inability to take responsibility. It was always someone else's fault. And back then the dynamic of our friendship was more me following him, like me looking to him for advice. So naturally some of that self-delusion began to rub off on me. I remember this one occasion where we'd not been invited to this one party that it felt like the entire school year had been invited to, which was a horrible feeling. But even then we were pretending that we didn't care. We were talking about how much better we were than these people. And I think even I knew by that point that this was total bullshit, that I didn't even believe the things I was saying. But that was still easier than admitting out loud that actually it might have been because we weren't very nice people, that we were actually quite prone to talking shit about others. And I'd love to tell you that me being honest with my friend in this way was received so well, and this was the turning point for him in which he became this amazingly charismatic person. But that wouldn't be the truth. And unfortunately, because of this reason, we're no longer friends. I think when it came to improving my social skills, part of that process that I realized very early on is acknowledging that I am a deeply flawed human being, and I still am. I make a lot of mistakes. There's always going to be room to improve. But when you're on that journey, when you're actively trying to improve yourself, there's nothing more draining than being around someone who is either unaware or just doesn't want to accept their own flaws. Some people genuinely spend their entire lives coping in this way, just making excuse after excuse. And as miserable as that can be for the people around them, I think what I've realized is nothing could possibly be worse than them looking back at the end of their life and just seeing all of this wasted potential. So I guess what I'm saying is I saw that in him, and as cliche as it sounds, I wanted to protect my own energy. I knew that I had to get out before this became even more of a problem. So if you don't want to make this exact same mistake, what I'd urge you to do is get into the habit of reflecting upon your experiences. For me, that looks like keeping a journal at the end of every day, just writing about how the day went, what I did well, but more importantly, what could be done better. And don't be afraid of seeking honest feedback from people that you trust. Like, sometimes it genuinely does help to know how you're being perceived by others. And with my friend, as much as I wished it had gone differently, he did take a step in the positive direction by asking me at the very least. So I appreciate you watching this far. I really hope you took something useful from this video, but I wish I could say these are the only mistakes people are making. For the sake of brevity, I could only include 3. If you want to save yourself the pain and disappointment of friends disappearing from your life without you really knowing if it was you who did something wrong, and I'd highly advise you to go down to the link in the description, join my Discord server. If you like what you saw in this video, it's only going to get better in there because I'm giving out highly personalized advice. I'm interacting with all my members, helping them solve specific problems to them. So if that's something that sounds interesting to you, I'd absolutely love to have you there. So that is all from me today, bro. I will see you in the next one.